CPS plan on London housing. I'm Simon Clark, Onward's director, and it's a real privilege to introduce today's event. I also want to say a brief word of thanks at the outset to my colleague, Rob Colville, who has done a truly outstanding job at the CPS over many years. And this may be our last event together, Rob, so I just wanted to pay tribute, and I ask you all to join me in paying tribute to what Rob has done. We are enormously grateful, and not just what you've done, but how you've done it is fantastic. Meanwhile, housing in London is in crisis. In 2024 to 2025, construction started on just 4,170 homes across this city, even as its population grew by 100,000. This dramatic collapse in house building is a crisis, and it is the most severe house building crisis that this city has known since the Second World War. You won't fix this by rent controls. You won't fix it by building council houses, and you won't fix it by pretending that the problem isn't real or that it isn't an economic and social disaster. So what do we need to do? You fix it through a proper plan, through having powerful mayoral development corporations, ambitious estate regeneration, Crown development orders, and a strong presumption in favour of building on brownfield wherever you can. Ultimately, we need to get radical, and we need to get tough on those who are blocking policy success here in London. I think the paper that we've set out is radical and deliverable, and it would change millions of people's lives for the better. Now, there is normally a risk that when two experts agree, it's only because they found an even larger group of experts with which to disagree. But in our authors, Ben and Lawrence, I know we have two brilliant minds who agree out of sincere conviction. And I really hope that all of you and people from industry and from politics and from the media will get behind this report and endorse it and champion it, because London deserves so much better than what we're getting right now. And with that in mind, I'm delighted we have two very senior political figures joining us this morning to respond to our report. And I'm delighted to introduce the first of these, my friend Sir James Cleverly. James is the Conservative MP for Braintree and the Shadow Secretary of State for Housing. He's held two of the great offices of state, as Foreign and Home Secretary, as well as Chairman of the Conservative Party. And he prides himself on being a politician who gets things done. Well, we need to get things done in London, James, and we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this report this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we are gathered here together. Sorry, I'm rather overcome by the location. Look, I'd like to thank Simon and Rob for inviting me here, and I'd also very much like to thank Onward and the Centre for Policy Studies collectively, but particularly I want to thank Ben and Lawrence for the production of this report. It is a thoughtful report, it's ambitious, and most importantly, it asks fundamentally the right question, which is, why has it become almost impossible to get any homes built in London? And if we are unwilling or unable to answer that question honestly, then we will continue to see growth stifled in London. We will continue to see missed opportunities in London. And I'm very conscious that there's a lot of London envy, and we might see some more of that in the near future. But being pro-Northern should not be anti-London. And as a home counties MP, I know full well that when London is not firing on all cylinders, the whole of the country suffers. So we all have a vested interest in London's success. And London became one of the, if not the greatest city in the world, because previous generations had the confidence to invest in the future. The Victorians built literally millions of terraced homes that still defined so much of the architectural vernacular and defined the city's culture. The generations that followed built new suburbs that followed the tube lines into the surrounding areas of London. Homes were rebuilt after the Blitz, and in the 1980s, the Conservatives completely revolutionised, drove a renaissance in Docklands, which has now created one of the world's global financial services centres right next door to one of the other premium financial service centres. Every generation faced different challenges, but whatever those challenges were, every generation recognised that to build in London was a big part of responding to those challenges. But today, sadly, we see a very different picture. London house building has fallen to the lowest levels since record began in the 1990s. And whilst it's not really possible for any of us to give precision with regard to numbers, I think we all recognise that even though the statistics started in 1990, the scale of house building has probably not been this low for many decades earlier than that. So ultimately we have a choice. Politics and government is about choices. And the choice is, do we want, or are we willing to accept a city where, do we want to have a city where people can still afford to live? A city where families can put down roots, where home ownership is something that is a genuine opportunity for people, something they believe they can aspire to, where regeneration creates opportunity and opportunity creates economic wealth that can spread across the whole of the UK? Or are we willing to accept a city where home ownership is only for those that inherit property, where it is impossible for people to work and earn and save their way to a new home? Do we want a city where the ambitious and the entrepreneurial leave because they simply cannot afford to stay? A city where employers struggle to recruit because workers cannot afford to live anywhere near their employers? Or where families postpone having children because they simply cannot find somewhere big enough that they can afford to raise a family? Now, the government's own target is that it should be building 88,000 new homes every year. Yet, as we've already heard, as Simon's already told us, construction has started on only 4,000 homes in a city of around 9.5, nudging towards 10 million people. Home building has not simply slowed down, it has collapsed completely. So it's all well and good that the Labour government has announced targets, but families cannot live in a housing target. They need actual homes. And why is that collapse in house building? Why has that happened? I mean, we keep being told about the housing market. Well, in a free-flowing market where there is so much surplus demand, and the demand is definitely there, buildings would be built, homes would be constructed, activity would meet demand. That's what markets do. And so why hasn't it happened? Well, it's simply because building has become increasingly unviable. And this is the central argument to the report, and it is absolutely right. So all the targets, all the ambitions, all the project plans are well and good, but then costs start being added. The cost of planning delay, the costs of new building safety requirements, the cost of biodiversity net gain, inflation in building costs, increased labour costs, increased taxation on increased labour costs, increased interest rates, higher taxation, red tape, more taxation, more red tape, layer upon layer, cost upon cost. And eventually, quite simply, the maths doesn't stack up. And when that happens, homes are either not built at all, or those that are built are priced at a level where Londoners cannot hope to buy them. And again, in the report, we see a chart. So on first glance, for those of you who have not looked through the report, I can't remember what pages it is on, but it's a rag chart, red, amber, green. But you will be mistaken for not recognizing it as such because it's all red. Basically, the chart says that even the wealthiest earners in London cannot afford to buy even the cheapest properties in London through earned income. The Home Builders Federation found that the cost of building a new home has risen by about £76,000 per unit in just the last 5 years. And around 40% of that increase comes directly from additional regulatory costs, and taxation. And as I say, there's another warning sign. This week, we learned that 1/3 of new built flats in London have failed to sell to private buyers. And that's not because Londoners do not want homes. Of course they do. But it's because so few people can afford them. And only 4% of landlords are considering buying another buy-to-let property. The Labour government has basically destroyed the private rental sector. So we have this weird Jekyll and Hyde situation where we have both incredibly high theoretical demand, but actually incredibly weak real demand. And because real demand is so weak, supply is collapsing. And without changing the cost of building, we've got to recognise that new homes are just unaffordable. And so if we want more homes built, and we should, and if we want more people able to buy them, and we should want that as well, we have got to remove the barriers to home ownership, not, as Labour seems insisting on doing, increasing the barriers to home ownership. I was very proud. During the Conservative leadership campaign, I proposed an abolition of stamp duty on people's primary homes. And I was very, very pleased when Mel Stride, as Shadow Chancellor, and Kemi, as Leader of the Opposition, embraced that plan. The next Conservative government will scrap stamp duty on people's primary homes because we should be rewarding aspiration, not taxing it out of existence. But the question of cost doesn't just talk to who can or cannot afford to buy. It also, of course, has a direct impact on where we build. And the increased cost drive some really perverse incentives. In too many cases, in fact, in almost all cases, it is much, much cheaper and much, much easier to build on greenfield sites than it is to regenerate brownfield sites. And if we want to protect the Greenbelt, and that is a completely reasonable and legitimate aspiration, we must make it considerably quicker, easier, and cheaper to regenerate brownfield land. We need to make urban regeneration commercially viable once again, because regeneration has always been one of London's great strengths. And if you look around the really successful bits of London, you see a pattern. The regeneration at King's Cross, the regeneration at Battersea, the regeneration at Wembley, the regeneration at Kidbrooke in southeast London, at Elephant and Castle. These places have been transformed through regeneration, economically and socially. They are now thriving neighbourhoods. And we're often told that nobody wants anything built. So we often talk about NIMBYs, or indeed the NIMBYs, the group of people that out-NIMBY the NIMBYs, the bananas. Are you familiar with the bananas? Yeah, the NIMBYs, not in my backyard, but the bananas even more so, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Look, it's a great joke, but actually, in reality, most people are not opposed to development. What they are opposed to is poor quality development. They're opposed to ugly development. What they want is good quality homes that go hand in hand with infrastructure. They want homes near schools. They want homes near transport. They want homes near recreational spaces, near parks, near open land. They want beautiful streets. And this is something I feel very strongly about. The aesthetic quality of the built environment matters. The very wealthy can buy beauty. Everybody else has to look at what others choose for them to look at. And if we are forcing a vista on people, we should have the good grace to at least build something that other people like to look at. And when we get that right, when we get the good design right, it doesn't just build beautiful buildings. It strengthens communities. It brings people together. It helps drive down crime. It helps unite rather than divide communities. And talking about that balance between Greenbelt and Brownfield, I'm very conscious that we've slipped into a habit in contemporary politics of everything being very binary. And I'm told that if you genuinely support home building, you have to support home building absolutely everywhere. And others say, no, if we want to protect what we value, we cannot build anything anywhere. And the argument has bifurcated to the anything anywhere of any quality and nothing anywhere irrespective of quality. And I completely reject that false demand. We should build. We must build, and we must build well. We must build quality in the right places for people to love, not just endure. And that means the people moving into those buildings and the people who already live where those buildings are going to be located. This report, very important report published today, sets out a program for doing what I have just discussed. Because the UK cannot succeed without London. And London cannot succeed by rationing opportunity. If it seeks to retain its position as a global city, it must make sure that the next generation can actually afford to live within its boundaries. London has reinvented itself before, many times. You're all too young and beautiful, but I'm old enough and ugly enough to remember in the 1970s where London's economic decline meant that it had a declining population. But previous generations, particularly Lady Thatcher, refused to accept that decline. And because she and people like her refused, London became a truly global city. And now it's our turn. It's our turn to make building viable again, to make ownership possible again, to make sure London doesn't just retain its place as a global city, but enhances its place as a global city. Somewhere that people want to live, somewhere that people want to work, somewhere that people want to start a business, somewhere that people want to visit and spend money. We need to build a great city once again, and this report sets out a blueprint of how we can do that. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
you so much, James. As Simon alluded, I'm coming to the tail end of my time at the Centre for Policy Studies after almost a decade. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that if you think it's hard getting politicians to work together, getting think tanks to work together is even more difficult. We are prickly, proud, and jealously independent creatures. So it has been remarkable how easy it has been with this report for the CPS and Onward to work together and to line up support both from James and the Conservatives and Richard, Laila and Reform. And that's because we all recognise that this is a national emergency and a national scandal. James wasn't quite right about the red, amber, green chart. There is a tiny fleck of green in that chart. If you are one of the richest 10% of earners in this country, you can, on ISS definitions, afford to buy the worst 10% of London's property stock. So the richest people can just about afford to buy the crappiest houses. But everyone else, 90% of people working in this country, is completely priced out of the market without access to parental wealth. That is, again, not just a disgrace, it is a scandal. And when we talk about the housing crisis, and we talk about it often, we don't appreciate the extent to which it is a London crisis. One of the key charts in the book shows that between 2021, 22 and 2023, 24, other regions of the country built 94% on average of their housing targets. Most areas of the north exceeded their housing targets. You might argue that those targets weren't high enough, but they did what they were asked to. London built 36%, and that was in the year before the 4,000. And you can blame the building safety regulator for quite a lot of that, but you can also blame Sadiq Khan. And I do blame Sadiq Khan regularly and repeatedly, as anyone who's read my Twitter will know. This report sets out more than 50 separate recommendations, but we think just 3 of them could deliver more than 1 million new homes, and deliver more than 1 million new homes in places where people actually kind of want them. Old Oak Common. You see it as you come in on the trains from north. Oh, look, in a few years' time, it is going to be the single best connected patch of land in Western Europe. It is going to have the Elizabeth line. It's going to have the West Coast Main Line. It is going to have HS2. Within the 10 or 15-minute walk of the centre of that place, there are 11 underground or overground stations. And Sadiq Khan wants to keep it as one-storey warehouses. He has shown absolutely no ambition on building the Development Corporation there. Similarly, if you are standing in the middle of the City of London and you start walking east down Old Kent Road, within a few minutes you go from some of the most expensive, glitzy, high-rise, valuable property in the country to absolute crap. There is space, and likewise near Canary Wharf, the Bakerloo Line extension, there is space by proper development corporations, empowered development corporations in these places, could deliver hundreds of thousands of houses. I live in Battersea Park. Every day as I walk my children to school, I see a new tower block. And I put this picture on Twitter today. Ben's glorious photography. Every day as I walk my children to school, there is a brand new tower block and a cruddy little derelict 3-storey brick warehouse because it is strategic industrial land. There is nothing strategic about that land. It is 3 minutes walk away from Battersea Power Station. There is no industry there, but it is preserved in aspic because the Labour Party refused to accept that. We should develop some of the most valuable parts of the country, and simultaneously estate regeneration. When estate regeneration programmes got going, and Alex Morton, who's here today, currently of Onward, formerly of the Centre for Policy Studies, when he published the original work on estate regeneration, arguing that there was not just scope but huge opportunity to regenerate London's estates, Labour lefties said, this is gentrification. We don't like gentrification, and people won't like gentrification either. So we are going to insist that every time you gentrify an estate, you have a ballot on it. You ballot the local people, and they, being good, ordinary left-wing workers, will reject this capitalist idea. And do you know what happens? Every single time they have a ballot, it passes with like one exception, I think, out of the 50 that they've had. It passes with North Korean levels of approval, because people like getting nicer homes, and they don't mind if more homes are built alongside them. And one of the points about this report we show is that there is overwhelming public support for building housing in London among Londoners. Instead, we have a ridiculous situation where we are trying to persuade people to accept housing who don't want it, while not delivering housing to people who desperately want it and desperately need it, and it would be fantastic for the economy. So I will stop ranting. But we were originally going to be having Laila Cunningham as our speaker, the Reform candidate for Mayor of London, but sadly she's in New York. But unlike the Labour Party, when we upgrade and replace people, it is a genuine improvement. And we are delighted and privileged to have with us Richard Tice. Richard is not only Deputy Leader of Reform and among his vast portfolio includes responsibility for housing. He is actually someone who has built housing. Unless Wikipedia is lying to me, his first job in 1987 was for London and Metropolitan, building houses in London, and he's worked in property for all his career. So there is hopefully no one better on the Reform side to outline their vision of housing than Richard Tice. Richard.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here, although I suspect that I'm not quite Laila, but there we are. It's an incredible report that Ben and Lawrence have done here for Onward. It really is, and seriously, please take it away and read every single word and look at every graph, because there is some remarkable statistics here, and the one that really strikes me is on page 15. The total collapse in the number of starts in recent years. Now, there was a bad old day when I was a Conservative, and briefly, I thought it'd be a good idea to stand for, to try and get the nomination to be the London mayoral candidate. And so I did some work into what our friend Sadiq Khan was doing and talking about affordable housing. And I sent a team around looking at the supposed starts that Sadiq had talked about. And my team were a bit confused. They said, but that's how it was announced last year. And it's now been re-announced this year. And we literally caught him cheating. And there was a double-page spread in the Evening Standard, and he was quite grumpy. But the reality is, I fear that this has gone on and on. And the failure to build the appropriate number of houses, and much of it, of course, has been, as others have touched on, because of the complete over-regulation and over-demand. And there's that simple economic statistic. 35% of nothing is nothing. 5% of something is something. And sometimes when you've got a crisis, you've got to be willing to take some risk. And in a sense, it's obvious, isn't it? If you want no risk, fundamentally, you'll pretty much get no reward. If you want the rewards of building a lot more homes, yes, you've got to make some bold, radical decisions such as that put in this report. And I think some of the suggestions around getting rid of viability testing. I mean, I saw it when I was chief exec of CLS Holdings back in 2010 to 14. We got consent for a few skyscrapers in Vauxhall and beyond. I mean, some of this viability testing, it was a nonsense. You were paying hundreds of thousands of pounds to come up with all sorts of reports to try and con this and fiddle that and fudge that. It's ridiculous. It was just another level of cost within the whole planning cost that meant, what did it do? It basically meant either the cost of everything went up or something didn't get built. And that's why you have to be bold, and I think that's what Ben and Lawrence have done here. With the viability testing, scrap it. We have to be brave enough to say, actually, if London genuinely has, and it's a pretty remarkable statistic in this report, if it has the highest percentage of affordable housing of any region in England, then you could say, well, maybe in order to kickstart some activity, you could say for a parliamentary term, you could say, we'll go to zero. You've just got to get some activity. You've just got to get some building and some growth. Which sort of then brings me on to, for example, our housing associations. You know, where is the discussion and the debate about saying, well, if that's the book value of their stock, what's the market value of their stock? Because if you revalue it at all, and let's say the market value for ease of maths was 50% higher, they could probably borrow 30, 40% more on their balance sheet in the bond markets, which would create a huge pool of capital in order to fund more building at a time when, yes, the private sector market is struggling. And I think these are the sort of brave, bold things
we have to be prepared to do. Now, for those of you who like to sort of a sense of diversity, equality and inclusion, then what I would highly recommend you do is come to the Reform Conference in early September, because on the business day I will be actually talking about detailed changes and recommendations to planning policies in order to kickstart more activity. And this report quite rightly is centred around the crisis in London. But actually many of the recommendations, in truth, apply across the majority of the United Kingdom. And we've actually got a shortage everywhere. And you look at our brownfield sites, I mean, there's lots of brownfield sites that are available for densification here in London. But you look at many of our town centres up and down the country, and it's what I call the donut principle. You know, 25 years ago, the donut of our towns had some delicious retail as jam in the middle of the donut. You look now, there's no jam in the middle of most town centres. It's just mouldy old cheese. We have a national emergency in our town centres, and you have to be bold in order to incentivise development, and that's why some of the recommendations around increasing the permitted development, around just making it easier to extend homes is really, really good. But just a couple of points in some of the detail at the back that are also worth digging into, because quite rightly, they've talked about some of the restrictions. You know, why should planners dictate what sort of flats are built in a block of flats? Who knows best? A civil servant or a planner, or the developers and the investors? Let the market decide. That's what happens in countries like Sweden. The developers know what the market wants. Let the market decide and build as much as possible. Why have a restriction on square meterage? For those of us old enough, I still think in square feet. But you know, if you're building a fantastic student unit that is, let's say, 19 square meters, why does a one-bed flat or a one-bed studio have to be give or take double that? Let the market decide. You have to be prepared to get more numbers up, because if you increase the supply of this stock, then guess what happens? The price either stays the same or goes down. And when people worry about affordability, the importance of getting the price down is absolutely critical. So there's some really important things there. There's some other key things around the building safety regulator. We had a debate in Parliament recently, and look, we all want to build smart, safe, secure homes, as in all walks of life, of course. And the building safety regulator is a well-intentioned response to a horrific tragedy. But it's the implementation that's gone so badly wrong. You don't need Gateway 1 and the building safety regulator. Gateway 2 deals with it. And why actually just have a quango with not enough staff that can essentially make the rulings? Why can't you outsource to the private sector, to the great engineering firms of this world, the Arabs, the Mott McDonalds? Why can't they be allowed, given that they are some of the best global multidisciplinary firms in the world? They could say, these are the conditions. Do the plans, does it meet consent and the application, the rules and regs, or not? And you are responsible, that outsourced firm, to the state, and woe betide you if you get it wrong. Those are the sort of bold, what I call a sort of joint venture between an important regulator, but being able to get the private sector to actually implement it. Now, it's always very boring when everybody agrees on everything. So it's important to highlight something where actually I would challenge this report. And that's actually around the issue of second staircases, where actually I do believe above 18 metres there should be second staircases. And if you go back to the Laila House report from about 2010-11, actually, people sadly died because above 18 metres there wasn't a second staircase. And so I do fundamentally believe there should be. And if you go around the rest of the world, the truth is there are second staircases at that sort of height. So I think there are some important debates and decisions. This report recommends above 50 metres. I think that actually probably isn't right. But I do think that these recommendations actually can be rolled out across much of the United Kingdom, because everywhere we've got a crisis of our town centres. We've got far too many unviable, unused, grungy-looking brownfield sites that should be brought into use before you bring in greenfield sites. And as James quite rightly said, it's so easy to build on a greenfield that actually developers, well, they'll just go for the easy lot. So actually incentivise brownfield development, and then everybody is the winner. So I think the benefits of this report do apply across much of the UK. And as I say, do take it away, do literally read it from cover to cover, and then again, because it's people like yourselves, people like us that I think we can and we must change things, because everyone knows there's a housing crisis, everyone knows there's a supply crisis, and we've got to do something about it. And in a sense, just to finish off, historically we've been, the population's been growing very rapidly, and so we've had to build more. That may change rapidly. Data out in the last 24 hours shows that actually, more deaths are occurring than births. So we may not be an issue of building housing just to meet a growing population, but actually in order to satisfy the existing population. And the nature of housing will change. As this report picks out, with AI, more people will work in different ways, in different environments. The old live-work units, more of this stuff is really, really important. So take it away. We need to adopt this stuff. We need to take control of our towns and cities from the hard socialists who just don't understand that simple economic fact. 35% of nothing is nothing. Thank you very much indeed.